You may have heard something along the lines of the following argument in the past. First, all men are mortal. 2, Socrates is a man. 3, therefore Socrates is mortal. These lines are an example of a type of deductive reasoning that is known as a syllogism. We defined syllogism earlier, but we can also describe it as follows. A syllogism is a type of argument that deduces a conclusion on the basis of 2 premises which share 3 distinct terms. These terms are known as the minor term, the middle term, and the major term. You may have seen syllogisms used before in everyday life, but never known how to describe how they work or been able to distinguish their features compared to other types of arguments. In this lesson, we aim to give you the terminology to do exactly that. Today's lesson will focus on the components of a syllogism. In any syllogism, there are 3 distinct terms: the minor term, the major term, and the middle term. The minor term is the subject of the conclusion. In the above example, the minor term is Socrates. Second is the major term. It's a predicate of the conclusion. In the above example, the major term is mortal. These terms constitute the conclusion of the syllogism. They are the terms and the premises about which we are making the inference. A note on the terminology. The adjectives of minor and major do not describe any relative significance of the terms or their roles in the argument. The major term is not more significant than the minor term in any manner. They are distinguished only by their placements in the conclusion. Finally is the middle term, which is the shared term that connects the 2 premises and enables us to draw the conclusion. In the above example, the middle term is man. The middle term is the term that does the bulk of the inferential work of the syllogism. If the middle term is not shared between the 2 premises in the above syllogism, then the argument would not produce any valid conclusion relating the minor term to the major term. For example, consider replacing men in the first premises with cats. First, all cats are mortal. Second, Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Although certainly the conclusion is actually true, Socrates was mortal, the argument used to deduce the conclusion is far from valid. Without a shared middle term to connect the 2 premises are irrelevant to each other. In any syllogism, there are 3 statements which are composed of the above terms. We have referred to them above as premises and the conclusion, but some of them have specific titles as well. These 3 statements are called the minor premise, the major premise, and the conclusion. The minor premise is the premise that contains the minor term. It can be the first or the second premise. In the above example, the minor premise is Socrates is a man. Then there is a major premise. The major premise is the premise that contains the major term. It can also be the first or the second premise. In the above example, the major premise is all men are mortal. Then there is the conclusion. This stays the same. The final statement of the syllogism. The conclusion combines the term that is unique to the minor premise to the term that is unique to the major premise. The middle term is never present in the conclusion. In the above example, the conclusion is Socrates is mortal. Therefore, we can conclude that the middle term can be shared in one of 4 ways. These ways determine what logicians call the figure of a syllogism. First, it can be the subject of the major premise and the predicate of the minor premise, called first figure. Second, it can be the predicate of both premises, called second figure. Third, it can be the subject of both premises, called the third figure. Or 4, it can be the predicate of the major premise and the subject of the minor premise, called fourth figure. Understanding the figure of a syllogism and how to determine it is important, because through it we can recognize that switching the order of the premises of a syllogism will not change its figure. Neither will it change the content of each premise. Thus, we can conclude that the premises of a syllogism have no required order. We can switch them around and still have a syllogism with all of the same relevant properties: validity/invalidity, types of categorical propositions, soundness or unsoundness, term clarity and vagueness, etc. Here are some examples of syllogisms. All birds are animals. All animals are alive. Therefore, birds are alive. This syllogism is both valid and sound. The premises are all birds are animals and all animals are alive. The conclusion is all birds are alive. The minor term is birds. The major term is alive. The middle term is animal. The minor premise is all birds are animals. Note that this is the second premise of the syllogism, whereas in the original example, the minor premise was the first premise. The major premise is all animals are alive. Note that this is the first premise of the syllogism, whereas in the original example, the major premise was the second premise. Here's another example of a syllogism. First, everything that's salty is good for cooking. Second, sand is salty. Therefore, sand is good for cooking. This syllogism is valid. However, it is not sound because its first premise is untrue. since it is clearly not the case that all salty things are good for cooking. The premises are everything that's salty is good for cooking, and sand is salty. The conclusion is sand is good for cooking. The minor term is sand. The major term is good for cooking. The middle term is salty, or things that are salty. The minor premise is sand is salty. The major premise is everything that's salty is good for cooking. Lastly, here's another one. Amy hates all critters. A thing that hates critters is a thing that hates cockroaches. So Amy hates cockroaches. This syllogism doesn't have the same format as the ones above. However, it can easily be reformulated to match the other syllogisms. To review, look at the other lesson, propositions and their parts. This yields the following equivalent syllogism. Amy is a thing that hates all critters. A thing that hates all critters is a thing that hates cockroaches. So Amy is a thing that hates cockroaches. This syllogism is both valid and sound. The premises are Amy is a thing that hates all critters, and a thing that hates all critters is a thing that hates cockroaches. The conclusion is, so Amy must be a thing that hates cockroaches. The minor term is Amy. The major term is a thing that hates cockroaches. The middle term is a thing that hates all critters. The minor premise is Amy is a thing that hates all critters. The major premise is a thing that hates all critters is a thing that hates cockroaches. In conclusion, out of everything Aristotle achieved in the field of logic, he is perhaps best known for his work on syllogisms. The reasons are clear. Not only are these kinds of arguments present almost everywhere, but they are a key way for us to make inferences and gain new information about the world. Thanks to his work, today we learned how to differentiate between validity and soundness when it comes to syllogisms, explain the different components of a syllogism structure, including the middle term, major term, minor term, major premise, and minor premise. Understanding the syllogism is really important and often a lot of fun. For more examples and practical questions, you can check out the Logic Made Accessible online curriculum resources.